Alright guys, now let's talk about this generic repository pattern. So in this particular section, we are going to talk about this generic repository pattern and we'll be implementing our module into that particular fashion itself. So in the last video, what we have seen is like we have implemented that the repository pattern, and which is a nice way to get started with that. And then what we are going to do is to generalize our code, and that is how we are going to achieve this by implementing this generic repository pattern itself. And the generic repository pattern is basically designed to provide a consistent and abstracted way to access data while reducing the need for redundant data access code. And basically here are the key components which I have listed so far here. And so if you just see the purpose here, so it says that separate data access from business logic. So that is what generics means, and so that is where it is getting applied with this repository pattern, and that's how it becomes generic repository pattern, right? And now that's the standardized data interaction it's going to provide that, and that is how let's see that what are these components mean basically. So it starts with repository interfaces. Basically it means like defines a set of common data access methods that are generic and can be used with different types of entities or data models. Common methods includes, let's say, a CRUD thing, let's say create, read, update, and delete operations, and which we'll be seeing that one shortly into that implementation itself. And then we have this generic repository, which means like implements the repository interface with generic types, allowing it to work with any entity type. That means you can substitute any entity and it will work type. And basically what is happening here, the logic is separated with any entity, and that is how it's going to work. And that is the generic repository comes into the picture, right? So it typically provides a generic methods for CRUD operations that can handle various data types. So that's the all implementation, generic repository detail about that. And then we have this concrete repository, which provides a specific implementations of the generic repository for that individual entity types. And these concrete repositories are responsible for the actual data access and interactions with the underlying data source, such as database in this case. Then we have this abstraction in place, which means like the pattern abstracts the details of the data access, so the business logic layer interacts with repositories rather than directly with the data source itself. And this separation of concerns promotes clean architecture, and that is what we are going to use that as well, right? So, and the decoupling way, you can just think like by using generic repository pattern, you decouple the business logic from the data access logic, right? So this separation enhances code maintainability and flexibility. Likewise, it also makes use unit testing, right, easier, right? So because it's easier to decouple the code itself. Then we have this reusability in picture, which means like the generic nature of repository interface. And generic repository class means you can basically reuse data across code, across different types, and reducing this code duplication. So having said that, enough about this generic repository pattern. It's nice to get started with actual implementation so that you can get the flavor like what is exactly going to happen. And you can parallelly code with me and ChatGPT in parallel. So let's get started with that.